Prologue. Belle brushed her hand down the skirt of her black cocktail dress. The ballroom of the hotel where the fundraiser was being held was decorated in high style. She hated these events her parents insisted she attend. Her father, Wentworth Brennan, was a United States Senator. She'd gotten used to attending the tedious events early on in her life. That didn't mean she'd ever grown to like them. This one would be no different than any of the others. "Hello, dear." Her mother, Belle Brennan, leaned down and kissed her cheek. "I'm glad you were able to attend tonight. Has work been keeping you too busy to pay us a visit?" She grimaced at her mother's condescending tone. Adria didn't approve of her occupation. Belle worked as an emergency room doctor at the local hospital in Castleberry. It kept her busy, and she loved the constant adrenaline rush involved. She couldn't imagine doing anything else. Her mother thought it was beneath her. It wasn't being a doctor she objected to. It was not having a prestigious doctor in the family. Belle had a lowly position at the hospital, without any real ambition to climb to a higher one. A different specialty would have been better, anything other than a general surgeon. It was, in her mother's mind, uncouth. Her daughter should rise higher and do better. She came from one of the best families, and there were expectations. "Everything is fine at work, and yes, I've been busy." Belle glanced around the room and spotted a gorgeous man sipping a glass of champagne. His dark hair curled around his ears enticingly, and his gaze left her breathless. He was staring at her and her mother. At least, it appeared as if he was. She could be wrong. With a quick glance, she surveyed her surroundings. No, there wasn't anyone else near enough for it to be anyone else. Who was he? "Are you listening to me?" her mother demanded. She said absent-mindedly. The man called to her on a level she didn't understand and wasn't sure if she wanted to. He might make this evening worthwhile after all. She'd have to introduce herself later, after she made sure to speak to both of her parents. "I think I'll go say hello to Father." After she hugged her mother, she turned on her heels to leave. She didn't want to give her mother any reason to keep talking. Belle had heard it all before. Why should she listen to her tirade any longer? It had been old before, and now it was ridiculous. She loved her mother, but that didn't mean she had to follow a path of her design. This was her life, and she'd live it as she chose, not how her mother wanted her to. Belle strolled over to her father's side and waited for him to quit speaking. He turned toward her and smiled. "I didn't see you come in. Have you been here long?" "No, I arrived a short time ago." She gestured to the room in general. "This is a huge turnout. What's the cause this time?" Her father was as far from a corrupt politician as one could get. He supported a lot of liberal causes that put the conservatives on edge. He was big on preserving the environment and cutting down on this generation's carbon footprint. It was one of the things that appealed to voters. He was charismatic and had big ideas. Those ideas kept him in office, and they evolved with whatever he deemed necessary to the preservation of the country he loved. Sometimes she wondered what her parents saw in each other. They were two totally different people. "This one is to raise awareness to a number of environmental concerns. There is also a few endangered species I want to bring attention to." He grinned. "If you get me going on this topic, you won't be able to shut me up." "You're enthusiastic about it." She smiled back at him. "I see nothing wrong with that." Her father was amazing, but he never had a lot of time for her. His causes always pulled him away from the family. She rarely saw her parents when she was growing up. It wasn't a bad childhood. Belle had everything she could possibly want or need, except attention from the two people who had brought her into the world. She'd accepted it, mostly. They meant well, and they loved her in their own way. That was all that counted. "Pardon me, Senator Brennan," a man interrupted. He was glancing around the room with agitation. "I was wondering if you had a moment to speak privately." "I'm sorry, this isn't a good time," her father stated. "Please set up an appointment, and I'll gladly speak with you in my office." The man sighed and shook his head. "I've already tried that. Your secretary says you don't have any immediate openings. Please, sir. It's important." Her father nodded, resigned to dealing with him. "I'm sorry, dear. We'll catch up later." "Don't worry about it. I know how to entertain myself." Belle, sadly, did. This sort of thing happened more often than not. Perhaps she should seek out the gentleman who'd been staring at her earlier. His gaze had promised entertainment. She could use a diversion. After scanning the room and being unable to locate him, she became resigned to another boring evening. Why did she even come to these functions anymore? She should go home and kick her shoes off. Days off didn't come around often enough for her to enjoy as it was. She'd already handled all the niceties by speaking with both her parents. In all honesty, she could leave and call it good. They'd not bother her any more that evening. An appearance was all that was required of her. She grabbed a glass of champagne off the tray of a nearby waiter and downed it. She set it on a different waiter's tray passing by and grabbed another. She sent up a silent thanks for her parents' belief in having plenty of waitstaff on hand for their fundraisers. One was always nearby when a drink was needed. "What are we drinking to?" Belle turned toward the man she'd been thinking of a few moments prior. Damn, he was sneaky and quiet. Where had he come from? "My freedom for the evening? You?" "I'm not much for drinking." She wanted to call bullshit, but refrained. It hadn't been her imagination that he'd been nursing his own glass of champagne earlier. Though she supposed he could have not finished it. Maybe he'd grabbed a glass for show. These events could be rather tedious and boring. Sometimes it helped to have something to hold on to. "Your loss," she grinned. "I rather enjoy a good glass of champagne every now and then." He lifted it from her hands and set it aside. "Why drink, when you can do other things to make you feel just as pleasurable?" Belle shivered at his words. More pleasurable indeed. What did he have in mind? "Down, girl. You don't even know his name." "I agree." She licked her lips. "However, I don't have anything else to elicit such feelings, so I'm opting for a known quantity." Let's see what he takes from that. She itched to pick her champagne glass back up and take a sip. She resisted, but only because what she really wanted was to put her hands on his chest and see if he felt as good as he looked. When had she turned into a wanton? What was it about this man that made her want to throw all caution to the wind and take a chance? This was not her, and yet she liked it. His steel gray eyes filled with something she couldn't quite identify. Desire? Interest? Whatever it was made her tingle from the inside out. "Maybe I can help you with that." She bet he could. He was so damn delectable. "Why, sir, I'm not that kind of lady." She leaned into him and ran her hand across his jacket. "At least, not without a proper introduction first." "What's the fun in that?" He leaned down and whispered in her ear. His hot breath caressed her cheek. "Don't you like a little mystery?" Ah, hell, he was smooth. "Does this usually work for you?" He chuckled lightly. "Yes, actually, it does." Belle believed him. She was about to throw herself into his arms and beg him to take her in front of everyone. Her body lit up hotter and brighter than a firework on the 4th of July. What would it hurt to give in and take what she wanted? His words promised they could enjoy each other and leave any and all expectations behind. Could she do it? She might need a little more liquid courage to throw away all her inhibitions. She glanced up and was mesmerized once again by the gray pools of his eyes. All she had to do was reach up and she could run her fingers through his dark tresses. Would he let her? Ah, yes, he would. He wanted her to give in and take what he was offering. "Your offer does sound intriguing," she replied. "I'm not sure it's for me, though." "Oh, sweetheart," he said huskily. "You're the only one it could ever be for. Don't think, just feel." He leaned down and brushed his lips across hers. A rush of tingles spread throughout her entire body. The jolt pushed her forward, and she gave in. She wrapped her arms around him and allowed herself to become lost in his kiss. Working in the hospital drained her and left her without any motivation to do anything other than crash in her bed. This man did things to her that she'd never experienced before. She wanted all of it. The kiss ended as abruptly as it began. He stepped back and lifted his hand to caress her cheek. "Let's get out of here." She should say no. It wasn't a wise choice to leave with a man she didn't know. Where would we go? His lips twitched into a smile. "As luck would have it, I have a room here. Say the word, and I'll take you there." He leaned down, his nose touching hers. "I promise you won't regret it." That showed how little he knew her. She'd regret it, dissect it, and question every part of it. It would bother her until the day she died. The very fact she was contemplating going through with it was so out of character for her, she might as well be someone else entirely. He was so enticing and out of her league. His touch was magic, and she wanted to drown herself in it. Was she really going to do this? Yes, absolutely she was. For once, she'd take something she wanted and the consequences be damned. Lead the way, Mr. Mysterious. She promised herself she wouldn't think too hard about what she was about to do. If she did, she'd back out of it. So she focused on what she wanted. One night where she'd have all of him, and he'd have all of her. Tomorrow wasn't always promised, after all, so she'd take it and keep it as a treasured memory. Thank heavens. He didn't wait for her to change her mind. The enigmatic man pulled her hand into his and led her away from the ballroom. The time for conversation had ended, and the promise of something wonderful awaited her on the horizon. They rushed to his room. He caressed her every step of the way. In the elevator, he kissed her breathless. In the hall outside his room, he pushed her against the wall and ran his hands up the skirt of her dress. Her body was alight with sensation. It took a long time for them to even make it into his room and make good use of the bed inside. It was wild, thrilling, and more than she could have ever imagined. Every part, every inch, and every single touch was perfect. It truly was. That night was one she'd never forget. He kept every one of those promises he'd made, and then some. She was loved in so many different ways she'd lost count. Her body ached in a good way. He was an amazing lover, and he ruined her for all other men. Somewhere in the aftermath of passion and the contentment only found after truly unforgettable loving, she'd thought she heard him whisper, "I'm better as a memory than as your man." Then he left without a word. It broke her heart into a million pieces. He promised she wouldn't regret the night in his arms. In a way, he was right. She'd not have traded it for anything in the world, but she did regret one thing. Belle never did get his name.